Happy Thanksgiving, all you mentees. This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition. And today's a day to give thanks. And what better day than today to talk about my top 10 graphic novels I'm most grateful for and why. So, please stay tuned. And welcome back, everybody. Now, before I get started, just a quick little note. I've seen in the comments section on my videos about top 10 graphic novels or top 13 graphic novels, whatever list that I do, a lot of people are confused as to why I use the term graphic novels. And when I'm talking about collected editions or manga, I want to say that's because, at least here in the States, about 15 to 17 years ago, the book market started changing the term of graphic novels, right? When I was growing up in the 80s, the term graphic novel meant something that was literally written for a graphic novel format. It wasn't collected editions, like A Contract with God, or the Marvel graphic novel line, like God Loves, Man Kills. Those were graphic novels. However, that term started changing about 17 years ago because the book market decided, I guess, it sounds better, a graphic novel, than saying comic section. So that's why I'm using the term like that, just to clarify any of the confusion. Now, that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about my top 10 graphic novels, collected editions, manga that I'm most grateful for and why. And a lot of that, for me, has to do with where I was in my life when I read these books and the importance of these books. And I would love to know your stories too, so please leave those comments down below. You can just leave a couple, you can leave 10, I don't care. You all know I read all your comments, and I reply back. It takes me time, but I don't care. I love you guys. And, of course, I'm really thankful for you all. So, let's go ahead and get started with the obvious choice. Uncanny X-Men Omnibus Volume 3. I have no idea how many lists I've made over the years and how many times this book has shown up, but it rightly belongs on that list. This book reminds me of my childhood. This book collects the very first X-Men comic that I got, and that's Uncanny X-Men 168. It collects the greatest X-Men comic in my eyes, the epitome of what an X-Men comic should be, and that is God Loves, Man Kills. So hey, that's an original graphic novel, so it worked. Loopholes. But seriously, this just encompasses everything to me about my childhood. You know, growing up, I've talked about living in Peru and then coming here to America. There was a language barrier. I didn't know English. The only thing that I had in English growing up in Peru were comics that my uncle would send me. So Uncanny X-Men is the one that was always at the top of the pile. And even though I couldn't understand what was going on, I loved looking at the pictures. And through the pictures, I could kind of get what the story was about. When I moved here, I went into a Catholic school, and because my parents thought that would be a wise choice for me, even though I knew zero English. So I got into a lot of scuffles. I got into a lot of fights because, you know, kids are jerks. No matter what you look like, no matter where you're from, kids are going to pick on you. They will find a way to pick on you. And mine was the English language. So I was miserable for a long time, and going home and learning English through television and through my comics was the way that I escaped. So for me, X-Men has always been like a second family. It was an escape from the reality that I wanted to get away from. And that's why it is always at the top of my list. And these stories in here will always remind me of that kid that would sit in his bed and just listen to music and read X-Men over and over again until he understood the damn books. So thank you, Chris Claremont. Maison Ikkoku. Now, this book takes me back to a dark time in my life when I was in a miserable marriage. Now, this is before my new, current, wonderful, and perfect wife. But I was married before. Some of you all know that, some of you all don't. And I was alone towards the end of it. Like, there were a lot of issues there, and I don't want to get into details or bash anybody because that's all in the past. But I was miserable, and I remember finding my stack of Maison Ikkoku when I had the single issues, and I decided to reread them. And it's a love story between a couple, and it takes a long time for this love story to actually fulfill, like, the way that you wanted it to. There's a lot of build-up, there's a lot of drama, but that's the way love really is in life, right? Like, we build it up, and it takes a long time for both of them to realize that they are both in love with each other. And it gave me hope, and it gave me that sense of escape that I wanted to, from, filing for divorce, trying to round up money by selling my comic book collection to pay for this lawyer and the bankruptcy, and just it was a dark time in my life, and this book gave me a lot of hope because after reading this, I remember thinking, okay, this is the kind of relationship I want. Once this broken thing is done, this is what I want. And that hope really carried me through a lot of those hard weeks. So I am in a better place now, though. So thank you, Rumiko Takahashi. Now, you're probably noticing that as I'm talking, I'm not talking about the artwork or the stories or the panel flow like I normally do when I do an overview of a book. I'm literally talking about my life in comics. So I guess this is more of my stories. And next up is Nightwing. I just told about a time in my life when I was in a dark place. Well, this is also a time in my life when I was in a dark place. I was in high school, and I was doing a lot of bad things. I wasn't reading comics. I had stopped reading comics. I was done with comics. I think Onslaught, as I've told many times, was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and that was it. I was done with comic books, and I got in trouble. I got in trouble with the law. I was running with a bad crowd. You know, everybody makes mistakes. And I remember one of the things that I had to do was serve community service. I did it at the library, and I did it at a Goodwill store. So at the Goodwill store where I think I had to do like 60 hours of community service there. But I went in there and, you know, just reflecting on my life. What the heck? What was wrong with me? Why was I doing these things that didn't seem like me? And I found a stack of Nightwing comics. And it was issues 1, 2, 5, and 6, I think. But it was Chuck Dixon and Scott McDaniel's run. And I read them on my break. And it reminded me of who I used to be. Like, not Nightwing, right? But just the heroes I looked up to. And the person that I had become was nothing like those characters that I grew up reading about. And I was so ashamed. And, you know, in a way, and it's not really, but I mean, in a way, it did turn me around. It turned me to turn my life around and get back to my studies and eventually get a scholarship to go to college. But it's just, it was comics. It was comics that brought me back to who I was. Because we all forget who we are from time to time, and we just need that one anchor to bring us back. And it's so damn dorky that for me, it was comics. Now, as I talk about my life in comics, I don't want to give any spoilers away, so I will warn you ahead of time if a story I'm talking about in my life has something to do with the story or any spoilers that happen in the book. So the next book I'm going to be talking about is God Country, and there might be just a little bit of a spoiler as to what the story is. And this is a wonderful story to me. It's a story about an old man who has dementia, cannot remember who his grandkids are, and the only time he remembers who he is and who his son is with his granddaughter is when he picks up this magical sword that comes from another world, and he's holding on to it, and he's able to remember his wife that is passed. He's able to remember everything. What does that mean to me? Well, first of all, this is a heartbreaking story. It's beautiful. It's Donny Cates. It's Jeff Shaw. And the thing that I got from this was, towards the very end, again, just a little bit of a spoiler, his son is able to hold the sword. Right, so it's father and son holding the sword. And the father is able to just move all his memories, every feeling that he had, like holding his son, holding his baby, all these feelings that he had into his son's head. And I wish that was real. I wish that was a thing, right? Like, my daughters will have no idea how much I love them. I mean, sure, you could tell your kids you love them, you could tell anybody you love them, but then they don't really know what's in your head, right? Like what you're willing to do, how you're willing to die for them and things like that. I think they know. But that taught me the lesson of just letting my feelings out and talking to my kids about these things, right? Like not being shy about talking about how much I love them and what they mean to me. So I tell them every day. And I think a lot of that comes because of this book, right? Because I don't want them to forget. I don't want them to become adults and have this shell of a man that used to be their father, used to play with them there. So that's why God Country is really important to me, and I'm thankful for this book. Next up is the Avengers Omnibus by Kurt Busiek and George Perez. I had no idea where I was going to go with this episode, honestly. I started this morning just picking out my favorite books I'm grateful for and thankful for, and then realized a lot of these stories are personal. Do I want to share them? And, you know, I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with sharing stories because I think everybody has a story to tell. So yeah, these are my stories. And if you're bored, I'm sorry. So Avengers, what does this mean to me? My dad was in a coma for about a month, a few years back, and it was hard. It was rough, and my dad and I have a really close relationship, and it's the kind of relationship I want my kids and I to have. But the thing I remember about those long, and I would stay every night with my dad until he woke up. I made it I don't know if it was in my head subconsciously, that I would be there when my dad woke up, because that's how much he meant to me. And I mean, his chances of survival were really slim. But I do remember those long nights, or sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, I would get up and lay by his bedside and read Avengers by Kurt Busiek. So maybe that's why this run means so much to me, right? Because at the end of the story, my dad did wake up from the coma, and he's doing great. Like right now, he's with my kids. But there was a moment where I thought I was going to lose him. And, he's a big part of my life. And to me, to get away from the reality of my dad laying in bed, in that hospital bed dying, or in a comatose state, I had to get away and read Avengers for a while. A story that gave me hope about heroes, right? And I read all those issues. I mean, all the way through Avengers Forever and the Kang Dynasty, which is freaking superb. But yeah, this is a book I'm thankful for. This is what got me away from that for a while. One can go back and forth with the question of what is Brian K. Vaughan's best work. Yeah, for a while I was like, well, Saga, but this is a different list, right? This is not like my favorite graphic novels or the best Vertigo comics, nothing like that. This is what this book means to me. So this one is actually a funny story, because this book always reminds me of reading this with my wife, my current wife, Melanie, the Astonishing Melanie. A few years ago, oh my gosh, over a decade ago, we got married and we went to Japan. And the final trade paperback, because that's how we were reading Why the Last Man, came out the day before we flew to Japan. So I went to the comic book store, I picked it up, I came home, and we read it on our back porch in this house. And we both read it, we both cried, we both held each other. It's a beautiful story if you've not read it. The Why the Last Man, not mine. But and then the next day we packed up and flew to Japan. So I will always remember the experience of reading this together, page by page, the final volume, crying together, holding each other, and then the joy of getting married to my best friend and flying to another country, to the unknown. And, man, it's a good story. For this next one, I have to try to keep it together, because this one still hurts. So a couple of years ago, I lost my dog, my little pup, Nikita. I'll always call her my little pup. She was 17 years old when she left me. So I had 17 amazing years with my dog. And this book always reminds me of her. This is Wings by Shinosuke Tanaka. And there's no words in this book. It's just the pictures that carry the book. But, she was old. She was the only thing remaining out of a broken marriage. And she really got me through a lot of hard times in my life when I didn't think I would ever be with anybody. We all think these things, like be alone for the rest of my life. And I would go on walks with her. And I remember picking this up because it reminded me of her, of how playful she was. Even though this little puppy has wings and gets into trouble. But I remember how she was. And she was a little husky. So, a couple of years ago we had to put her down, and I immediately came home and picked this up, and it still reminds me of her. So I can't pick this book up without thinking of Nikita, but that's why I love this book, and it will always be a part of my collection. Now, I've talked before about how wonderful Geoff Johns is and how much I think JSA is his best thing he ever wrote. So why is Green Lantern on here? And where the hell is Starman? Well, maybe I'll make another list, but for now, we're talking about hope. And this is a phenomenal book in a time of my life when, it gave me a lot of hope. So it is the story of redemption. It's the story of how Hal Jordan was evil and, did a lot of horrible things in his life and killed some of his friends. And I'm not going to say exactly what happened in here, but I'll let you find out. That all kicks off in the Rebirth storyline. But, every time something horrible happens to me, I'll always remember the line where Parallax, this big, giant creature, the evil in this book is beating down the Green Lanterns, and he's beating down Hal Jordan, and Hal Jordan just does not give up. He keeps standing up. And, the Parallax asks him, why don't you just give up? Why can't you give up? And Hal just looks at him and says, I don't know how. And that line right there gets me every time, because no matter, I've been fired from jobs, broken relationships, but that's me. That I don't know how to quit. That's the way I've lived my life. You can ask my wife how many times I asked her out before she finally said yes, or how many times, I try to get a job and would try to call the place and be like, hey, do I have it yet? Haha. It's just me. It's the way I've always lived my life. I don't give up because I don't know how. Now, with this masterpiece, I do have to talk about a spoiler, and the spoiler is the very final page to the life and times of Scrooge McDuck. And I've got this in many different collected editions, but this is probably my favorite one. This is from Boom Comics. And I've talked about the importance of Carl Barks and Don Rosa's Duck comics on the channel before many times, so a lot of you all know I'm a Duck fan. But Don Rosa is to me like the just top notch. I love Carl Barks. I love what he did, but Don Rosa, oh my gosh. So the life and times of Scrooge McDuck is literally his beginning when he was a kid, how he got to America, how he made his fortune, right? So we all think of him as this rich duck that just swims in his money bin, and that's what he worships, right? Is the coins, is the gold, is the money. So towards the end of this book, at the very last page, Donald is talking about how he's just an old man with nothing to gloat about except all this money surrounded by him. He's just a miserable old man. And his nephews look at Uncle Scrooge and say, I don't think so, Uncle Donald. I think there's more to it than that. And the final page that gets me every time is him looking at each of the coins in his money bin, and each one reminds him of a story. And I think as a collector, that's what this is about. As a guy that collects all these collected editions, each one of these books take me back to a place in my life where I used to be. Whether it was a happy time, whether it was a sad time, whether it was a bad time in my life, or whether I wasn't reading comics and something brought me back. But I guess that's what this list is about, right? It's a collection of stories that I get to tell through collected editions. And the last book on this list, yes, it's another X-Men book, but damn it, it's my list, so of course I have to talk about this. And that's Astonishing X-Men. So, why is this book on this list? Why Astonishing X-Men? Why not Uncanny Volume 1 or the Jim Lee years of my childhood, or how often I have to redraw Psylocke in that bikini? Maybe I'll do another set of these stories again if y'all want. But Astonishing X-Men to me is a symbolic welcome home story. Not just for Kitty Pryde, but for me. So I've told you all how I stopped reading comics when I was in high school because of Onslaught, and just because, I took interest in other things. And then after my divorce, I wanted to come back to comics. After reading Maison Ikkoku, I wanted to come back to comic books again. I wanted to start getting monthly comics. And it would go up and down. Sometimes I'd leave them. But it wasn't until the first issue of Astonishing X-Men that I was like, okay, I'm home. Just like Kitty. So Kitty Pryde returns back to the mansion, right? And she's looking at the mansion, this empty mansion, where she's had all these memories, right? Like flirting with Colossus, or Professor Xavier's a jerk. And she realizes that she can never leave. Like, the X-Men will always be a part of her life. And I think this is the book that made me realize, okay, I give up. Comics will always be a part of my life. And this is the book that reminds me of that. And if you've not read it, it's amazing. It's astonishing. But this absolutely is the book that brought me back. And I've been there ever since. And now I have a YouTube channel talking about these stories. So that's it. That's my stories that I had to share. So these were my top 10 graphic novels, collected editions, manga that I'm most thankful for. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com. They're having a big Thanksgiving sale right now. You can get books up to 90% off. Tell them Near Mint Condition sent you their way, and they can give you a free code for free shipping on your next order in the US. And yeah, let me know your stories. I love to know. I love reading stories. Like I mentioned throughout the episode, I think everybody has a story to tell. And I'm sorry if I bored you. But if you did find this enjoyable, let me know in the comments down below, and I'd be happy to make another list like this, because to me, each one of these holds a special memory, and every time I look at my shelves, I'm like, I get lost in these books, and I start opening them up, and they take me back. So they almost work like a time machine for me to take me back to where I used to be. And then some of them give me hope to where I'm going to be. So this was the Uncanny Omar. I'm thankful for you all too. Thank you everybody for watching. Have a wonderful day.